This is episode 665 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. First out of the chute here, Wally, is the new Fraser Institute, Canadian-based free market think tank, Economic Freedom of North America Edition 2024. And
we're not number one, are we?
I know it's shocking. Shocking.
Are we number two?
No. We're getting down to that, but the least free.
Are we last?
No, we're
that's
not
good.
last.
That's good.
California, Hawaii, and New York are the three states that perform worse than us on economic freedom within North America. And this is one of those yeoman projects that some organizations do. The Fraser Institute's based in Canada. They work with, among others, folks at Southern Methodist University for a full and exhaustive conversation about the index. I suggest you check out my conversation on this week's interview with Dean Stansel. We won't belabor the point too much, except for to say that economic freedom is really very highly correlated with all the good things when it comes to prosperity, really strong economic outcomes, a state that is growing and dynamic. The idea that government more or less leaves people with the respect to basic regulation, low taxes that don't infringe upon economic freedom, those kinds of things. People do better. They have higher incomes and better outcomes within a economic freedom framework than they do in a more restrictive state. And this is across international lines, as the Fraser Institute has reports on those measures internationally, and of course here in New Mexico and across the country, we are among the laggards, certainly regionally, but also nationally when it comes to economic freedom. And when you ask why are our children at dead last in the Voices for Children Index, well, we are governed by people who don't get economic freedom. That would be the most simple and straightforward answer to that question.
Yeah, Paul, and it's interesting. I was thinking about economic freedom as opposed to the opposite, which is, I guess, too much government. And it's really and I think this is New Mexico's problem. When you have a system in place of economic freedom, low taxes, low and reasonable regulation, just not onerous, the free market really likes that. They come in and they do a lot of good things with it. Government tries to solve problems directly. So they're like, we're going to take money from you and then we're going to solve it. The only problem is government's history of solving problems with taxpayer money is very, very poor. And so, there are two ways to do it, but boy, New Mexico, we're in the business of eating the seed corn. It's like, okay, we have all this money, but we're not going to spend it on anything that makes the system better so that people actually want to live here and work here. We're just going to take the money and try to do these foolhardy endeavors on all of these problems, or just ignore the problems and spend it on our favorite pet political project.
Yeah. So check out the index for yourself. Check out my conversation with Dean Stansel. Fraser Institute does a lot of really great work. And New Hampshire, South Dakota, Florida, Tennessee, Texas round out the top 5 for the U.S. rankings. Subnational levels, what you're going for if you do check it out. That means it's the state policies that are driving things. You can also, in this very same report, again, which is linked to at airsofenchantment.com, you can find out which Mexican states and provinces in Canada are doing the best in terms of their own economic freedom. Uh, Shockingly, Alberta does very, very well. Quebec, the least well. So it's really a lot of work and a lot of annual data crunching to make sure that they have a firm grasp and that the readers and users of this report have a firm grasp on which states are embracing economic freedom and which are not. And unfortunately, New Mexico continues down its path, especially under the current governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, not somebody who has displayed a great deal of interest in economic freedom and broader improvements in our state. It's a lot of government-driven policy making across all areas, and while that may the focus that we prefer is we want to boost our community, we want to improve our state, we want to address things like the lack of economic diversity, our over reliance on one industry. We want opportunities for our kids. If all of that doesn't work, maybe a winning football team would be enough for some people. I don't know. It's like arguing with the brick wall sometimes, because I feel like no argument gets the people of New Mexico to vote for economic freedom. And of course, New Mexico's marquee, the flagship university, NMSU grad, but Bronco Mendenhall, the head coach, left for, you could say, greener pastures. He took 1 year, came to New Mexico, did a okay job. I mean, almost made a bowl game, beat a top 25 team. Very exciting stuff. But recently has told the UNM athletic program that he is out of here after that 1 year, and he's going to take a job at Utah State University. Now, you look at it from a football perspective and you say, well, gosh, Utah State University, they're another Mountain West school. They're okay in football, but not exactly a straight shot promotion upward. In fact, Utah State University is the third best college football program in the state of Utah, a state that borders New Mexico and shares many characteristics of New Mexico. But the University of Utah and BYU are both bigger brothers to Utah State University. Yes, he said, "Oh, I've got folks at home, etc." Not exactly a vast distance between New Mexico and Utah, but Utah is closer to Utah than New Mexico is, or any other state. That's where Mendenhall happens to be from, and his elderly mother still lives there. But football is a economically driven sport. It always has been. We've talked about this a little more in recent months because there have been more crossovers between, kind of athletics and football in particular and New Mexico's economy. But yeah, goodbye, Coach Mendenhall, and the Lobos go back to square one, if not below square one, when it comes to trying to reboot their football team.
Yes, Paul. And, I was very surprised in a positive way when Bronco Mendenhall came to UNM. I was like, whoa, he'll do pretty well, to the point that they started off very, very slow, but by the end of the year, they kind of kicked it into gear, won a big game. I believe the first top 20 opponent win in a couple of decades, so that's good. But then he's gone. And there are a couple of things here. One, I would just say, from my perspective, college football is no longer in any way, shape, or form. It never was at the biggest levels, but it is no longer in any way, shape, or form anything about it as amateur. It is professional. The name, image, and likeness market, that is how the players get paid. And if you don't have a way to get them name, image, and likeness money, they will leave. And the NCAA, with the transfer portal, has made it easier to go to greener pastures for money, if for nothing else, than even anything that's available for an NFL player. So there's a lot of flexibility there. So it's very much what can you do for the athlete on a year-to-year basis. And right now, New Mexico is in a tough. We are in a tough situation. I I need to quit saying this, but I'll say it one more time, and then that's it for until the next time I say it. But it's like in "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" We're in a tight spot. We don't have a very big private economy. That's what does the advertising for name, image, and likeness, and that's likely not going to change. And so, we have two paths. We're either going to be at the bottom, a miracle will happen, or we will go to something like NCAA Division II, where we could compete. But boy, that is not, that's nobody. Nobody brags at the national level that, well, we're a NCAA Division II champion, even though there's a lot of value in that. Don't get me wrong. I mean, my father was a small college coach in athletics, and I know it takes a lot of skill to win, but that's not what people want out of their flagship universities.
Yeah, and you mentioned the financial aspect of the name, image, and likeness. I mean, college football has always been driven in part by economic factors. You need a large population. It helps to have a large population of young people who are into sports. I mean, every college team needs 100 plus young people, young men on it. It's expensive to provide all those scholarships, and now with the NIL, you have even more uh, money involved in that system. And yeah, I think we are in a pivotal time period for UNM football. They've struggled for a very long time, but uh, it's part of the broader trends in athletics. When combined with our lack of economic diversification, there become fewer and fewer paths for ever becoming competitive when it comes to uh, particularly football, but that's going to impact all aspects of your athletic program. It's not just UNM, it's NMSU, it's everybody at the state level. If we want to be competitive, having private businesses that can sponsor and put up money for these kinds of things makes a huge difference. It used to be, well, Sandia National Labs doesn't sponsor your kids' t-ball team or little league. Now we've gone quite a bit up the financial scale to, well, now Sandia National Lab doesn't sponsor your UNM football team, not certainly the way a Fortune 500 business would do.
Yeah, and then just one thought is, as much as I don't like the name, image, and likeness system, I think it beats the money under the table system with that it replaced. At least
Yeah.
it's out in the open, and there was a lot of that. The arguments almost remind me of voter fraud. Oh, we've never found any fraud in NCAA football because we never looked. In the They didn't have to even look. It just, a lot of these stories would just fall out of the air, not with any great investigative infrastructure put into place. So at least now there's a way to do this legally. I think that's a positive. And by the way, New Mexico never did well in the legal way of getting money to players to get them to come to UNM either, as far as I've been told by my limited yet knowledgeable sources in college athletics. So
Yeah, well, maybe it's appropriate that we talk to somebody from Southern Methodist University this week because they famously were paying their players back when Eric Dickerson was a running back for
yes.
SMU. But we don't really talk about that with Dean Stansel. So, um, but
That's one of those. I'll come on your podcast, but I won't talk
yeah,
about that.
yeah, that's probably still a sore subject over there. But speaking back to the realm of higher education, not so much on the athletic side of things, but more in the realm of what are we paying for with regard to so-called free college. And Congressman Gabe Vasquez had a tweet, and this was reported recently in the media that New Mexico's colleges and universities saw an uptick in number of students deciding to attend there in the last year and how important that is. Of course, if you provide something for free, you're going to have a certain level of interest in that product that you might not otherwise have. The question is, of course, we're the taxpayers, we're paying for all of this, and what are we getting out of the deal? And there's never been an economic analysis showing that free college has any real benefit to New Mexico, economically speaking. But I happen to be doing some research at the Department of Finance Administration website. And again, you can go to errorsoфenchantment.com and find this particular chart. But looked at graduation rates from our universities uh, over 6 years, interestingly enough. New Mexico Tech, the toughest school by far, does the best at 55%. New Mexico State, kudos, Wally, right there at 50%. I don't know how this stacks up nationwide. I think this is actually fairly typical. 50% graduate. Now, 6 years is a little more generous. I've normally seen 5 years, but uh, University of New Mexico 49%, Eastern 34%, Highlands 27, Northern New Mexico 20, Western 24%. That is their 6 year university graduation rate. And then there's college, community college, 3 year graduation rates. I'm not going to go through them all, but they range from as high as, let's see, 30 or 40% at Mesa Lands down to 12% at Southeast New Mexico. And then, yes, our enrollment is up, but it's been on a trend line downward uh, for years in New Mexico. Obviously, uh, they're going to have a difficult time right sizing New Mexico's higher education bureaucracy. We've already got a very bloated higher education bureaucracy, but uh, the idea of shutting a university or community college is almost unheard of, not just here in New Mexico, but across the country. And with New Mexico having a lot of oil and gas money and a very weak economy to the point where, getting a community college or keeping a community college in your area of the state is probably right up there in your economic priorities. It's going to be very difficult to shrink this entire system as kind of the effects of free college wear off, and we continue on a downward trajectory where we talked about it last week. uh, Public schools 15.2% within the next few years is going to be a drop in attendance. Families and children are leaving the state of New Mexico, and that's all on top of the fact that birth rates are way down throughout the United States. So we're going to continue to see more money pumped into higher education, just like public education department and K-12 at large. So a lot of money flowing in. What are the results flowing out?
Yes, and colleges are nationwide. There's a what is the value of a college education? They have a value proposition problem. There's a lot of people that go and get huge student loans to get a degree that does not have much economic value. And believe me, Paul, I'm a big fan of the art history degree, but I don't think if you and your family are in that position where you are going to need to work as opposed to inherit your family fortunes or live off your trust funds, that's a wise choice. And so, it's one of those accounting, engineering, some medical oriented degrees, some scientific, some math. There's some computer science. There's some degrees that have some value, but there's a lot that don't. And for a state like New Mexico, yeah, we are now we're not optimizing, we're maximizing. So look at it. We have the most people in school, but a lot of those students that are going there, it may not really help them. And the thing about quote unquote free college is if you have tuition and fees 100% paid for, believe me, that's a good thing. But room and board at a state school, you have to figure that out. So unless you're UNM, University Near Mom, or any other version around the state, basically living at home or with a family member, that's a big financial hurdle that you're going to have to deal with some way or another. And so, what's the answer? I don't know, but I do know that government institutions and schools in general they don't look at it from a right sizing point of view. How big do we need our college programs to be to give optimal education for X number of students that we think are available and we can attract? It's kind of a grow, grow, grow. And when you do that, I think this will likely not get better in the short term. And the New Mexico has a problem. We have so many institutions of higher learning and they're constitutionally called out. So, not that you couldn't get rid of them, but it'll be harder. Uh, of New Mexico's intractable problems, I think this one is actually a lot harder to deal with than many of the other issues facing the state.
Yeah, all great points. The obvious value, and you mentioned that right at the outset, the value of these degrees is being called into question in a way that probably since World War II, nobody really ever looked at the value and what is actually being taught. Now, there's a difference between art history, and I'm sure that that is a worthwhile degree for a lot of people. Now, is it worth you and I and the taxpayers of New Mexico paying for that, or women's studies, or a lot of these kind of oddball diplomas? I think that is an open question. And that really gets to the heart of how much funding from the taxpayer is enough. Obviously, um, in New Mexico, we are very heavy in terms of our investments or spending on higher education. Other states, not so much. Personally, I believe that the prime beneficiaries of a college diploma are the people who actually obtain the diploma. This
Yeah.
is not a societal good, certainly not on the order of an education that, like a K-12 education, that you kind of need as a baseline for surviving in society. There are plenty of job opportunities that do not need a college diploma, and these, of course, are immense bureaucracies. They are uh, kind of they have a lot to do with spawning left-wing political behavior and ideas and ideology in a lot of young people. So uh, I'm not a fan. One of many, many of our government spending programs here in New Mexico that we should be doing something very, very differently with, and downsizing, right sizing the entire higher ed bureaucracy. But uh, that's the way we're going.
Yeah, and just one final point: when you spend a lot as a state, and you have very good graduates that come out, even if there's not a lot of them, or your graduation's low, if you have a lot of, if those graduates work in your state, you could argue that that's a very good positive return for the state. When you have a state like New Mexico, that the private sector growth is so small, our best and brightest tend to go to Texas and Arizona to get him in Colorado to get employment, not stay here in New Mexico. And so, if you look at it from a societal point of view, from a point of view of a regional, I think the region thanks us, but doesn't necessarily benefit New Mexico directly because of our, just poor private sector situation.
Yeah. So moving on tonight at Bernalillo County Commission. By tonight, I mean Tuesday, December 12th. The county commissioners will be voting on
December
raising the
10th.
raising. Yeah, sorry,
No, that's all right. It's all right. I was like,
12-10, or in the European style 10-12. But either way, it is yes, December 10th. That is due to the passage of Amendment 4, which, quite honestly, we weren't big fans of. But a lot of things happened on New Mexico ballots this election cycle that we weren't such big fans of. But they essentially, the voters allowed county commissioners themselves to set salaries for their own for their own work. And the legislature, I think it's fair to say that for being a county commissioner in Bernalillo County, close to a full time job, getting paid $39,000 a year, it's definitely on the low side. Now there are conversations and legislation because of the delicacy of this situation being near the holidays, and you want to pass something if you're going to pass it before the start of the next calendar year uh, in order to take effect. So they're going to be voting on potentially raising the pay for these county commissioners. One proposal would be up to $150,000 annually. I hope and expect that that will not be the way the county commission goes, a near quadrupling of their pay. I'm I suspect that there's going to be some pay increase, and I tried very hard to find the last time that the legislature gave the county commissions across our state the leeway, a pay raise, because that was the way it was done before this constitutional amendment passed. Uh, I think it's hard to say that nobody wants to run for county commission, and there are capable people, or are we going to get some improvements in governance at the county level? I have my suspicions and doubts on that, but I will be there to keep an eye on the process, to testify in favor of not going hog wild, so to speak. If they want a small increase, especially given the recent inflation rates, growth, and other factors, I think there are reasonable increases to be made, but certainly nowhere near the six-figure mark of $100,000 or above.
Yes, this will be fascinating, Paul, because I do have a feeling that the phrase "pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered," if they put too big of a uh, increase out there, there could be a constitutional amendment to scale that back at some point. It would not be
Sure.
impossible. And then, greed in among elected officials, it is a thing. It happens. And so
I'm shocked.
to
Shocked.
have and I don't call them, our legislature doesn't get a salary, but they get paid. Believe me, if somebody gives you a retirement plan, you're getting paid. That's compensation, but not compared to $150,000 a year. So they could their life, Bernalillo County's life, could be made difficult from lots of ways if they go too far. So we'll see, but it's one of those that it sounds good, and for the short term, Paul, it's beautiful. I would love. We'd all love to be in that situation. What do we think we deserve as our salary? All in favor, say aye. 150,000 sounds good to me.
Yeah, hopefully that is not the way it pans out. We'll report on this next week. Briefly, Wally, uh, the governor wants to move the state fair. Uh, and that's obviously got potential to be a very expensive proposition. We don't know any details, so we're not going to really go too far down this path until we have a little meat on the bone, a little details a few details to discuss. But basically, the idea is, the state fairgrounds are here in the heart of Albuquerque. Uh, I honestly have no idea whether they bring down or increase. I'm sure that living next to the horse track might be less than ideal, with the dust and whatnot and the smells. I don't know how much of a factor the state fairgrounds are in kind of the deterioration of what we would call the international district or the war zone. Uh, don't know how much growth needs to happen, how much the fair needs kind of new buildings and whatnot. But this could be a very expensive proposition. The path forward is very, very unclear in terms of where the fair would go next, and some very moving parts.
Probably to land owned by a state legislator is my
Right,
guess,
and some
but
of
maybe
the
not.
concerns there. But
Yeah.
any initial thoughts on this particular situation?
Well, I read the quotes in the Albuquerque Journal article by the commissioner, and what's interesting is that you raise an excellent point is about what is the impact of having the fairgrounds on that larger area. Well, they made the point in the article, the state fair commissioner, too, that boy, it would bring more housing, it would bring down crime rates. Somebody could actually put a grocery store in there if we had more housing in there. Uh, where have they been when this rampant crime in that part of the city has just been not ignored but accepted as normal?
Hmm.
And so I think there's a lot of which comes first, the chicken and the egg, or who's going to want to develop that area if it's just going to be, right now there are boundaries around that. That is a gated community, albeit not for residential use. If you're going to tear down, yeah, if you're going to tear down the walls and make these open streets into there, you're going to have the same homeless that are in that area that they have a hard time dealing with, and the same crime problems. And so if I were a developer, and boy, developers love big tracts that you can do a lot with, before I put my money down, I would want to see some progress moving in the right direction with regard to crime in the area, because I happen to think that uh, the issues related to the reason that there aren't grocery stores and pharmacies in that area would not be improved any by this big new redevelopment project if there's not uh, an emphasis to address the crime issue, not after but before.
Yeah, and I think that is obviously a big part of this and kind of my philosophy. It's the same as putting a a bid or a tid in downtown Albuquerque, or redeveloping downtown Albuquerque. If you don't address the criminal element head on, if you don't focus on improving public safety, you are just going to potentially ruin what could be a several $100 million investment here and not help out the overall city of Albuquerque. And I think that is the true question that needs to be asked: is if we actually focused on improving policing in the so-called war zone or international district, would we get a better result from this situation? Because it is it is a rundown area. Yes, the housing stock and changing that out could improve the clientele, the people who live in that area, but those folks aren't necessarily going to leave the city. The low income folks that live in this area, not all of them are, they're trying to get by just like everybody else. There's obviously a relatively small, compared to the overall population, criminal element, but what's going to be done to make sure that Fairgrounds 2.0 or redeveloping that area doesn't fall into the same state of disrepair, or just move the problem to a different part of town?
Yeah. And then finally, Paul, the thing that interests me is that I don't have a lot of confidence that when the redevelopment plans put in place, I think there'll be a lot of things there. What are they going to want? What does kind of woke development look like? It's high density, public transportation only, or electric vehicles only.
Oh
All
boy.
electric
Yeah.
neighborhoods. So what does that happen? So here's the thing, and if you have high density high density with high crime, that sounds a lot like the projects to me. And so it could go really bad. And so we'll have to see. And just so we know, the last time somebody really promised a very forward-thinking proposal, it was the Albuquerque Rapid Transit. And how has that worked out relative to all the plans? In my opinion, not very well. But uh, That will be an interesting one too, because my thought is they're just not going to sell this to a developer. It will come with more strings attached than you could ever imagine, would be my guess. But as you say, we're all for it. Let's see the plan.
Yeah,
I mean,
we're not dismissing it out of hand, but we are skeptical, as with anything relating to government, especially under this current governor, who definitely we have our more than our share of disagreements with. All right, well, we've got a Maxeon update, the solar company that's breaking ground. I'm not going to go into all the ins and outs, but for those of you who study business spreadsheets, profit and loss for a living, the the Maxeon books are not very good. I mean, this is a company that I wouldn't invest my own money in. Uh, the governor, of course, and this kind of gets back to this whole discussion about the fairgrounds. She has such a terrible track record when it comes to things like Maxeon Solar. Just a couple of details. So this was all published on Yahoo Business, comparing fiscal year quarter 3 with quarter 2. So 2024, a drop from 526 megawatts of shipment to 199. Revenue dropping from presumably 184 million to 88 million. Loss or profit, some companies do make a profit, not Maxeon, from 7.78 million to 179 million loss. And there's just a lot of other aspects to this. It's worth going into details. I just put out there on social media and on Heirs of Enchantment. These are some really ugly financials. And again, Maxeon's a private company. God bless them. I hope they have the best of luck in a free economic market where they're not getting massive subsidies or mandates to use their product. I'm not against Maxeon Solar. I'm against the idea that we, the people of New Mexico, are being fleeced to fund this particular company to come here. It's not good business, and they don't have a good business model. It's the flat out fact.
yeah, and then Paul, I think there's a lot of onshoring of things because of the Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. And boy, I almost cough every time I say that word because of its impact. But yes, they are in a tough situation. And I think absent that kind of government impetus, they wouldn't be here anyway. So, it's a question of can they make it under the current system that's in place? And what will that system look like under the Trump administration going forward? There could be even more. There could even be more wild cards thrown into their business dealings. And as you say, New Mexico, if the state is all behind it and thinks it's 100% winner, that's been the kiss of death on many, many projects, and we really wish that wasn't the case.
Very true. Now, the last one is kind of a not a delicate topic for us, but we are on the record as not opposing remote work. You and I, Wally, have done more than our share probably of remote work, but we are not federal employees. And we have always, you and I and many other people who do remote work have always had a strong connection between doing the work and getting food on the table. The connection with the federal government is not so great. And one of the news stories that came out recently is that only 6% of all federal employees report in person to the office 5 days a week. Nearly a third are remote full time. And this has led to abuses. It's obviously expensive. The occupancy rate for federal office buildings in DC is 12%. So why are the taxpayers paying all this money for office space that is going unused? And so one of the things that the Trump administration and Elon and Doge are looking at is to either push these people back into the office, which would probably result in some shrinkage of the federal workforce, because there are people who live probably here in New Mexico who at one time had a job in DC that they had to commute to, and now they're working remotely. Same with other states, by no means just New Mexico, but if you're going to be paying for all of these office spaces, and if we are going to be paying these government bureaucrats to do something, uh, they probably should be doing their work, unless there's a very measurable outcome. They have to do it in an office space.
Well, and I read an article about that 6%, Paul, that said, well, 6%, that's barely more than just the security and custodial staff that actually has to be there.
Yep.
So that's a pretty low number. Um, it's one of those things that your point about remote work, it's not inherently bad, and sometimes it's the only way to make things happen in the public sector or the private sector. Um, Here's the thing, though, is right now, as we have it, we have all these office buildings that we're paying money for. So, are we going to turn those back if that's the case? And if accountability can be done, depending on what agency it is, some are easier than others. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this is a huge deal, and so it's one of those things. Heck, just making people go back to the office. They say, "Oh, we're never going to be able to, under the rules, get rid of this many people." Heck, if you just make them go back to the office, it probably get rid of a lot of them that just don't want to have anything to do. And if you look at accountability in the government in general, I'm sure there are departments, and I've worked with a lot of government departments that do have a lot of remote workers, and boy, they're always on the, they're there on the calls, they're there doing the work, they travel, they do a lot of work. But I do have a sneaking suspicion that is not uniform or uh, broad based. And finally, the other thing is that where our government workers, I've seen things about how big the administrative staffs are, quote, in the DC area. It's like, do we really need hundreds and hundreds to thousands of FBI agents in DC? Do we need them out in the country working? And do we need Bureau of Land Management people in DC, or could they come out to the states where they're actually managing the land? Would that be better? So a lot of things to address here. And until this most recent election, I would have said I wouldn't hold my breath on that changing anytime soon. But it seems like there is, for the first time in a very, very long time, some momentum on uh, getting federal government under control, and this is just one of the facets that they're looking at.
Yeah, just to be completely clear, do I believe that a lot of these federal agencies are completely unnecessary and could be shut down tomorrow? Yes. Do I think that all of these federal employees are going to magically become vastly more productive by going into the office? No. And is vastly more productive federal labor a good thing? Not always. But I do think that as a starting point to getting a handle on this sprawling federal bureaucracy, making sure that people show up to the office is at least a starting point. And if that does result in 5 or 10% of the federal workforce self ejecting from their government job, that's great. If it makes them more effective in their work, that's fine too. So, um, just it strikes me as a really big opportunity for President Trump and for government efficiency, and we'll see how it goes. So glad to see more of an emphasis on shrinking government than we saw in the first term of the Trump administration. So with that, we will have to let things go. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.